Hello there, and welcome to the Emerald Nightmare. My name is Tuskeh, and in this video we are going to go over everything you need to know to defeat Elerethe Renferal in the Emerald Nightmare on normal and heroic difficulties. She's one of the 4 optional bosses that you must defeat in the Emerald Nightmare after Nithendra, and you can choose to complete them in any order. She is generally considered the easiest of the 4. You'll be facing her on a series of 3 platforms dotted with spider eggs and connected via web bridges. If you fall off of these platforms, you die. Elerethe is a 2-phase fight with 2 different types of spider adds. Elerethe will periodically shapeshift between her spider and rock forms, using different abilities in each. Unless your damage dealing team is underperforming or undergeared, this isn't much of a damage race, so you'll want to focus more on dealing with mechanics than rushing her down. A standard raid composition of 2 tanks, 3 to 6 healers based upon the group size, and a mixture of ranged and melee damage dealers will suit you just fine. Let's start by discussing the environment. There are 3 platforms in this fight, linked by multiple web bridges. Around the edges of each platform and dotted across the bridges are surging egg sacs and pulsing egg sacs. Surging egg sacs will, if touched by a player, release a small swarm of skittering spiderling adds that will melee anyone that they can and will need to be killed. The pulsing egg sacs, identifiable by their red glow, will, if touched, explode and deal tremendously high damage to all nearby players. When the fight begins, Elerethe will be in her spider form. 1 minute and 30 seconds after the fight begins, she will transform into a rock, fight your raid for about 30 seconds, fly to the next platform in a counterclockwise direction, and then, approximately 2 minutes later, transform back into her spider form. So let's start with her mechanics in spider form. Right after the fight begins, Elerethe will use Web of Pain on 4 players, linking them in sets of 2. The 2 tanks will always be targeted, and then 2 other players will be linked. The Web of Pain causes damage taken by either of the linked players to also damage the other player. This damage is increased if the 2 players are more than 20 yards apart, indicated by the web glowing red. There's no way to break this, but it will eventually time out. Damage that is absorbed will not be shared, and any damage reductions will also lower the damage going out to players linked. Elerethe will periodically use necrotic venom whilst she is a spider. This chooses a couple of players and marks them with necrotic venom for 10 seconds, creating a green circle about them. This debuff does nothing until it expires, but when it does, the players will gain a new, identically named debuff that lasts for 6 seconds. During these 6 seconds, they will deal damage to themselves and everyone in a short radius, indicated by the green circle, and they will continuously drop venomous pools for the duration, which are large green stationary pools that damage anyone who stands in them. Elerethe's most impactful ability in this phase is Feeding Time. Periodically, she will ascend onto the web above, climbing out of melee range. Immediately afterwards, venomous spiderlings will drop down from the web, and Elerethe will begin to use Vile Ambush. This creates a green targeting circle indicating where she is going to drop down. A few seconds later, she will land in the center of this circle, dealing heavy damage to the raid. The damage each player takes is reduced the further they are from Elerethe's landing position. Standing within the green circle when she lands will pretty much instantly kill you. So, these venomous spiderling adds are dangerous, for they hit extremely hard and must be tanked, and they have 2 impactful abilities. Firstly, they will use Dripping Fangs to place a hard-hitting and stacking damage over time effect on anyone they melee. And secondly, when they die, they will create a venomous pool, which is identical to the pools left behind by necrotic venom. Those are Elerethe's abilities for spider form. About 1 minute 30 seconds after the fight begins, she will transform into a rock and gain a new set of abilities. Her spider form abilities will stop being cast at this point. For the tanks to worry about is Raking Talons. This deals heavy shadow damage to her target and causes them to take double damage from Raking Talons, which will stack. Elerethe will use this ability multiple times in a row. She also uses Razor Wing, a short cast time ability that, after it finishes, deals damage to and knocks back anyone stood in front of her. This doesn't track the tank, she just uses it in a cone in front of her after a short cast. Elerethe will mark 2 random players with Twisting Shadows. Just like Necrotic Venom, this creates a swirling targeting circle of purple around players afflicted by it that does nothing and lasts for 10 seconds. However, unlike Necrotic Venom, during this 10-second period, if a player runs over a venomous pool, they will remove it. Be warned though, they will still take damage from running over the pool before it is destroyed. After the 10-second debuff ends, the player will create a tornado at their feet. This tornado moves in a small area around itself and stuns anyone it comes into contact with for a short period before throwing them out. Additionally, on heroic mode, if a tornado flies over any venomous pools, it will throw poison at the raid, creating multiple green swirling targeting zones, indicating where the poison will land and deal area of effect damage. Elerethe will also use Gathering Clouds. This is an 8-second long channel that will deal damage to the raid team and push them back for the duration. This can push players into venomous pools, tornadoes, egg sacs, or off of the platform, and requires that players run against it. Immediately after using Gathering Clouds, Elerethe will use Dark Storm. This does several things. First, it causes her to fly away from the platform and to the next in a counterclockwise direction. Secondly, it begins dealing constant damage to the raid, steadily increasing over time. Thirdly, it will cause her to drop multiple feathers, dependent upon your raid size, in a cone in front of her. If a player runs over one of these feathers, they are granted a 20-second buff that causes their jump to send them very high into the air, and allow them to freely glide around. While in the air, they have an extra action button that enables them to target the ground and jump down, instantly killing any spider ads that they land on. To reach Elerethe after she flies away to the next platform, the raid must cross the web bridges. As long as a player is on these bridges, venomous spiderlings will periodically spawn. There are also surging and pulsing egg sacs along the way. Once a player reaches Elerethe, she will stop using Darkstorm and begin attacking normally. A couple of minutes after she enters rock form, she will return to spider form, and the fight repeats itself. So those are Elerethe's mechanics. Now let's discuss strategy. So this fight is about two things: the placing and management of venomous pools and tornadoes, and the transition between platforms. Once you nail these two things down, you should be fine. Our strategy was to mark the platform she begins on into two sections with two separate world markers. She was tanked on the southern side of the platform at the beginning, with all players stacked around her. We used Bloodlust on the pull. Players linked with Web of Pain would stay together, with the tank most capable of mitigating damage, in our case our Guardian Druid, taking Elerethe's melee hits to lower Web of Pain damage to the other tank. Players targeted by Necrotic Venom would run to the very corners of the room, not the edges of the platform, the western side of the room, taking care not to touch any egg sacs and deposit their venomous pools in the corners. If an immunity or huge damage reduction could be used, like Cloak of Shadows, those players would drop all 6 of their pools atop one another. When Elerethe used Feeding Time, the raid would move to the other side, the north side, of the platform, and use personal survivability spells to help mitigate the damage from Vile Ambush. At this point, the venomous spiderlings would spawn, and the tank not tanking Elerethe would pick them up with the aid of misdirects and tricks of the trade. Be wary though, since Elerethe uses Vile Ambush very shortly after the fight begins, and those abilities may not be off of cooldown, so you're going to want to save at least one of them. All damage dealers would swap to kill these spiderlings as the tank pulled them into a corner where the other venomous pools were being dropped. Once the situation became too dangerous for melee, they would back off and ranged damage dealers would finish the spiderlings off. Healers beware, the tanks will likely be out of range of one another here and they'll take heavy damage, thanks to Web of Pain getting stronger. The tank taking Elerethe will want to use a cooldown here to help their off-tank survive the Web of Pain damage and the spiderlings. This phase would repeat until she entered rock form. We would stack up on the south side of the platform, moving pools away and killing spiderlings away from the team. Then she'd use Vile Ambush again and we'd return to the southern side of the platform where we started, and she would enter rock form. Your strategy for handling the tornadoes and pools in this phase is dependent upon your placement. If you've placed the pools poorly and you don't have much room, you're going to want to use the Twisting Shadows debuff to clear some. But we found that doing this could often leave tornadoes near pools, creating a huge space issue if they began to pick up and throw the poison at the raid. So instead, we allocated players afflicted by Twisting Shadows to deposit their tornadoes on the eastern side of the room, near the edge of the platform. Shortly after this, Elerethe used Gathering Clouds, and the group stacked up in front of her to allow for AoE healing. Now is a good time to use personal survivability spells and healing potions. As soon as she finished casting this, she would cast Dark Storm, drop the feathers, and fly off. Before the pull, we had allocated the feathers. One for the main tank, one for a powerful tank healer, and the rest for ranged damage dealers picked essentially at random. Our goal now was to cross the web bridge as a group, with the other tank picking up any spiderlings that spawned. The tank and healer with feathers would fly towards Elerethe as soon as possible to pick her up. The damage dealers with feathers would stay roughly with the group and use their extra action button to squash any spiderlings that were clumped up. But we would have to be wary here. There are tornadoes on the web bridges that can pick up the poison and throw it at the raid. For this reason, our strategy was for the tank to pick up the spiderlings and move them onto the next platform before we got them stomped on. This didn't really work out in the footage you're watching now due to premature stomping, but that would be our strategy as we refine this transition. In an effort to maintain cohesion and avoid tornadoes, our group would stack up with the non-feathered tank on a raid marker that overlooks the lower web bridge, where a shaman would place their Windrush totem. The tank would call out for us to begin, and we would run directly forwards up the bridge. We would then duck around the egg sacs and make our way to the next platform. We would then return to Elerethe and continue the fight, watching for any poison pools that might be thrown at us thanks to tornadoes and premature stomping on spiderlings. At this point, the tanks would watch for raking talons and tank swap in between the casts to avoid one of them being one-shot. The tanks would face her away from the raid and move aside for Razor Wing, and players targeted by Twisting Shadows would simply move away from the raid. At this point, Elerethe died, but if you were to transition again, you'd want to head to the north platform, moving as a group, as before, whilst a feathered tank and healer rush to Elerethe and feathered damage dealers stomp on spiderlings at the correct time. That's it for this fight. You have plenty of time to do all of this, and again, this fight is much more about handling mechanics than it is pure damage, so focus entirely on correctly handling pools, tornadoes, and your movement, and you'll be fine. That will conclude this guide. If you have any questions, thoughts, comments, or suggestions, you can contact me using the links in the description, or you can just leave a comment. If you want to help support the channel, then you can find a link to my Patreon page in the description below. Thank you very much for watching, and I wish you the best of luck in the Emerald Nightmare.
We got it.
Kill Nexa. Okay.
Close enough.
We killed Nexa.